A silent ship floats in dead space, its metal skin carved by forces we cannot name. This is the Star Seeker, a ghost vessel with a single sleeping passenger. Captain Kaelen Vance jolts awake as emergency lights bathe his cryo chamber in red. A ship-wide alert screams through the silence, triggered by a single data fragment, a sliver of a star chart pointing to a place called the Vault. And then a voice, thin and ghostly, whispers a warning through the static. They are coming for it. This is where our story begins, a desperate race against an unseen clock. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the profound secret the ancient Star Kings died to protect. What kind of treasure is worth a chase across the galaxy, and who are the silent hunters that seek it? What would you risk to protect a secret that could rewrite history? The ghostly whisper still seemed to hang in the air as Kaelen rushed to the bridge. His engineer, Jax, was already there, fingers flying over the console, the recovered star chart fragment glowing before him. Its lines weren't like any modern navigation plot. They were angular and ancient, a geometry of forgotten stars. With a final tap, Jax superimposed the data over a current galactic map. The lines converged not on a star or a planet, but on a vast, swirling cloud of dust and ionized gas. The Cygnus Veil, that name alone was enough to send a chill through any spacer. For thousands of years, that nebula has been a place of superstition and silence, a graveyard for signals and a place sane pilots avoid. Jax leaned closer, his face illuminated by the eerie light. This is not a map, it is a warning. He traced a cascading energy signature along the chart's edge. Look at this decay rate. The Star Kings did not just vanish, they hid something, and whatever it is still active. It bleeds power like a wound that never heals. Before Kaelen could form a response, a shrieking alarm cut through the ship. The main viewer flickered to life, no longer showing the star chart but the stark blackness of space directly behind them. A ship hung there, sleek and predatory, a design unlike anything in the galactic registries. It was all sharp angles and darkened alloy, and it had dropped out of warp without a single transmission. Its forward cannons glowed with a malevolent violet light, already charging. Kaelen slammed his hands on the controls, throwing the Star Seeker into a violent, gut-wrenching roll as the first volley of energy bolts screamed past the viewport. The Star Seeker groaned in protest, its frame shuddering as violet energy washed over the shields. It was not a direct hit, but a calculated nudge. They are not trying to destroy us, Kaelen realized with a cold dread. They are hurting us. His hands were a blur across the console, fighting the ship's own momentum, right into a gravimetric shear. On the main viewer, the nebula's edge churned with invisible tides, a lethal storm of twisted gravity that could rip a ship apart like paper. Jax shouted a stream of numbers and probabilities, his voice tight. The port thrusters, he yelled. We can overload them. It is the only way. It was a terrible gamble. Overloading the thrusters would spin them violently, a move that could shred their own engines, but it would also send them careening directly through the edge of the shear. Kaelen gave a single, sharp nod. Do it. The ship lurched, a deafening roar filling the bridge as the port thrusters flared with suicidal intensity. For a heart-stopping moment, the Star Seeker became a wild, uncontrolled top, spinning straight into the chaotic energy field. Alarms screamed as gravitational forces tugged in a dozen different directions at once, but their reckless maneuver worked. The pursuing ship, caught off guard by the sudden, unpredictable trajectory, was buffeted by the shear's outer wave. Its sleek form was thrown sideways, a flicker of light dancing across its hull as its systems scrambled. The interference was just enough. A jump window, fleeting and unstable, flickered on the nav scope. Kaelen did not hesitate. He punched the command, and the stars stretched into streaks of light, hurling them deep into the silent, swirling heart of the Cygnus Veil. Behind them, the hunter was left blind. Its prey vanished into the cosmic static. Silence pressed in on the Starseeker, thick and heavy. Outside the viewport, the nebula was a permanent, swirling twilight, a fog of violet and deep blue that swallowed their senses and left them truly blind. They were navigating by instinct and the faint, decaying echo of the star chart. Then, a shape resolved from the cosmic mist, a structure so alien it seemed to be a growth of the nebula itself. It was a ship, or what remained of one, its hull a fusion of crystalline lattices and smooth, bone-like spars that curved into impossible, elegant forms. This was no human design. This was a relic of the Star Kings. Jax guided them to a ragged tier in the vessel's side, a docking maneuver performed with agonizing slowness in the sensory void. As the airlock sealed behind them, the only light came from their suit lamps, cutting beams through a profound darkness that had lasted millennia. Kaelen stepped onto the derelict, his boots making no sound on the strange, resonant material of the deck. His hand rested on the grip of his plasma pistol. "Life signs?" he asked, his voice a low transmission through his helmet comm. Jax, hunched over a portable scanner, shook his head. "None, not for a very, very long time, but the power reading from the star chart, it is not the ship itself. It is coming from deeper inside, a sealed chamber at the heart of this wreck." They moved through corridors that felt less like hallways and more like the petrified veins of some colossal, fossilized creature. The air was still and cold, holding the absolute quiet of a tomb. Finally, they reached a seamless wall of opalescent crystal, humming with a low, persistent energy. Jax found a control node, his tools bypassing security protocols that had not seen use in ages. With a deep, resonant tone, a section of the wall irised open, revealing a circular chamber. Inside, there was no frozen corpse, no ancient skeleton. Instead, in the center of the room, a figure of light coalesced. It was a humanoid form, clad in ornate, archaic armor, its features sharp and noble. Its eyes opened, not with biological sight, but with the piercing focus of a focused energy signature. The holographic sentinel regarded them, its voice a clear, resonant chime that held no malice, only a timeless, solemn duty. "Do you seek the vault?" it asked, "or are you its warden?" The question hung in the air, a single query that divided all of existence into two possible paths, two reasons for being there in that forgotten place. Everything depended on their answer. The holographic sentinel, Lumina, did not move, yet its presence seemed to fill the chamber. It was a guardian, it explained, a final echo of the Star Kings left to test any soul who breached this silent tomb. "The vault does not hold treasure as you know it," Lumina intoned, its voice a symphony of chimes. "It holds a key to creation itself. To prove you are not the destroyers, you must answer. What is the price of eternity?" Kaelen stood frozen, the weight of the question pressing down. This was not a test of knowledge, but of understanding. He thought of the ghost stories told by old spacers, tales of immortal beings cursed to watch galaxies burn out. He met the sentinel's luminous gaze. "Oblivion," Kaelen said, his voice steady. "To live forever is to watch all else die." For a long moment there was only silence. Then Lumina gave a slow, approving nod. The sentinel's form began to brighten, its light condensing into a single, brilliant point that then erupted, not as a flash, but as a complex, three-dimensional star chart that hung in the air before them. It was a complete map, a route through the nebula leading to a single, impossible point. As the last of Lumina's energy faded, the new coordinates burned themselves into their nav computers. A wave of relief washed over Kaelen, but it was brutally short-lived. A violent, metallic shudder tore through the derelict ship, throwing them both against the crystal walls. The hunter had found them. It was not firing yet, but the impact was a clear, terrifying message. They were no longer hiding, they were trapped. The impact tore through the silent derelict like a thunderclap. A magnetic grapnel line, thick as a man's arm, had speared their hull, tethering the Starseeker to the scavenger ship Rusted Talon. Before the echo faded, armored figures poured through the breached airlock. Their leader, Captain Vorlag, stood framed in the doorway, his plasma rifle aimed squarely at Kaelen's chest. "I will take that data, Vance," he snarled, his voice a grating distortion through his helmet's vocoder. "The vault's bounty is mine." There was no time for a reply. The standoff shattered into a storm of searing plasma bolts and flying crystal shards. Kaelen and Jax were driven back, firing as they retreated into the labyrinthine corridors of the alien ship. They used the strange, organic architecture to their advantage, ducking behind crystalline growths and into side passages that glowed with faint, residual energy. It was a desperate, running battle, a dance of light and shadow in a tomb that had known only peace for millennia. Amid the chaos, Jack's fingers danced across his wrist comp, his movements hidden by the cover of a massive, bone-like spar. With a final, decisive tap, he sent the vault's coordinates on a tight beam burst to a hidden data cache aboard the Starseeker. The transmission was a ghost, a single pulse lost in the nebula's static. It was their only hope. The firefight eventually stalled in a wider chamber, a standoff across a chasm that dropped away into darkness. "We are not getting out of here fighting each other," Kaelen shouted, his voice echoing in the vast space. "That hunter ship is still out there, and it will tear both our vessels apart if we do not leave this nebula now." Vorlag's laugh was a harsh, metallic sound. "You think I am a fool, Vance? You would shoot me in the back the moment we jump." Kaelen lowered his weapon, a gesture of immense risk, a temporary truce he offered. "We pool our nav data to plot a safe jump out of this interference. We get clear of the nebula and the hunter. Then, and only then, we settle this." Vorlag's helmet tilted, the red glow of his optics boring into Kaelen. He knew it was a lie, and Kaelen knew he knew, but the logic of mutual survival was inescapable. "Fine," Vorlag spat, "a truce, but the moment that vault is in sight, our deal is done." It was the only way out, a pact made in full knowledge of the inevitable betrayal to come. They were allies for a single jump, racing toward a prize that could only have one claimant. The jump from the nebula's chaos was anything but clean. Emerging from the warp, the viewport revealed a scene of cosmic violence. Two stars, one a raging blue giant and the other a cooling red dwarf, waged an endless war of light and gravity. And between them, invisible yet dominant, hung Kesilos. The dormant black hole was a perfect sphere of absolute blackness, a hole punched in the fabric of reality, its presence felt only by the furious, glowing halo of its accretion disk. Jack stared at the sensor readings, his face pale. "The coordinates are not for a planet or a moon. They are pointing directly into that." He gestured at the swirling maelstrom of superheated plasma and space-time warps. "The vault is inside the disk itself. To reach it, they would have to fly into a storm where gravity itself was a fluid, shifting force, where a single miscalculation would see them stretched into a stream of atoms." On the shared comms channel, Captain Vorlag's voice was a strained growl. "You expect me to follow you into that? This is a suicide run." "You have no choice," Kaelen replied, his eyes fixed on the navigational data Lumina had provided. "The path is there. It is a thread through a needle's eye, but it is there. Your ship cannot calculate the tidal stresses without our sensor fusion. We go together or we die here." The rusted Talon fell into formation, and the two ships, locked in their hateful alliance, dove into the inferno. It was not a flight but a fall, a controlled plunge along a gravitational tightrope. Alarms blared constantly as the ships were buffeted by plasma streams that washed over their shields in waves of incandescent light. The real danger was unseen, the gravitational tides that pushed and pulled at the ships like toys in a hurricane. Jax and the Talon's navigator worked in a frantic, silent partnership, their voices tight with concentration as they called out course corrections. "Hard to port now. The gravity shear is spiking." The Starseeker shuddered, its hull groaning in protest as it skirted the edge of a vortex that could have crushed it to dust. The rusted talon, less agile, was caught by a secondary wave, its shields flaring violently as it was shoved off course. For a terrifying moment, it seemed Vorlag's ship would be swallowed by the chaos, but a desperate burst from its engines clawed it back onto the path. This was the absolute limit of their technology and their truce. Every second was a negotiation with physics itself, a dance on the edge of a bottomless pit. The two captains, united only by the need to survive, guided their vessels deeper into the heart of the storm, chasing a secret buried in the fire of a dead star. The path ended in perfect, unbroken blackness. Jax's fingers flew across the console, his brow furrowed in concentration. According to the ancient coordinates, the vault should be right in front of them, yet every sensor sweep returned nothing. "It is like staring into a bottomless well," he muttered. Then he remembered the final, cryptic layer of Lumina's data, a string of quantum resonance frequencies that made no sense until now. He began the calibration, tuning the ship's entire emitter array to a sequence that felt more like a musical chord than a navigational command. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then space itself began to bleed. The blackness in front of their viewport shimmered, then fractured like a sheet of dark glass. The fragments did not fall away but dissolved into shimmering motes of energy, revealing what had been hidden all along. The vault was not a planet or a station. It was a perfect dodecahedron, a 12-sided shape so vast it blotted out the swirling chaos of the accretion disk behind it. Its surface was a black so absolute it seemed to be a hole in reality, a material that drank the light from their viewports and swallowed their sensor pings without a single echo. There were no seams, no markings, no visible doors. It was just there, a silent, impossible geometry hanging in the fury of the binary system, a fortress built from the very fabric of nothingness. How do you open a door that does not appear to exist? The absolute blackness of the vault offered no purchase, no clue to an entrance. Vorlag's patience, always a thin veneer, shattered completely. On the shared comms, he roared an order to his gunner. The rusted talon's forward lasers lanced out, twin beams of concentrated fury meant to carve through battle-grade armor. They struck the vault's surface and simply vanished, absorbed into that light-eating material without a flash or a scar. For a single, suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the vault answered. The energy returned not as a reflection, but as a focused, amplified pulse that slammed back into the rusted talon with the force of a meteor strike. The scavenger ship's shields flared and died instantly, its hull screaming as entire systems were fried into molten slag. The talon spun away, crippled and trailing sparks into the void. In the ringing silence that followed, a familiar, chiming voice whispered from Kaelen's own comm panel, a residual echo of the guardian they had left behind. "Violence is not the key," Lumina's voice intoned, serene and absolute. "The vault answers only to resonance, the resonance of a worthy heart," Kaelen understood. This was the final test, one that could not be forced or faked. He took the controls, his hands steady despite the tremor in his breath. Jax fed him the flight path, a sequence of maneuvers so precise it was less a course and more a melody written in movement. The Starseeker began to glide, its hull skimming so close to the vault's surface that the absolute blackness filled the entire viewport, a dizzying proximity to nothingness. This was not a matter of navigation, but of synchronization. He had to become an extension of his ship, feeling the subtle shifts in gravity and energy, letting the vessel's own power core hum in harmony with the ancient structure. It was a dance of trust, a silent conversation with a machine built by gods, and a single misstep would mean being cast adrift like Vorlag, or worse, being absorbed into the silence forever. The Starseeker slid forward into the seamless black, the vault's surface rippling like dark water before swallowing them whole. The transition was silent and absolute, the furious light of the accretion disk vanishing as if it had never existed. Inside, there was no corridor, no chamber in any recognizable sense. They floated within an immeasurable space, a labyrinth woven from threads of living light and impossible angles that hurt the mind to follow. Corridors of shimmering energy branched and spiraled, connecting and dissolving in a silent, constant dance. Jack stared at his scanner, his voice hushed with disbelief. "The path changes," he whispered. "It is reading our intentions." Every time Kaelen thought of the vault's prize, of the power it might grant, the luminous pathways ahead would twist, leading them toward dead ends that folded back on themselves. When frustration sparked, a bridge of solid light would simply dissolve beneath their prows, forcing them back. This was not a maze of stone and metal. It was a living, reactive test of the soul, built to repel any presence driven by greed or malice. To find a way through, Kaelen had to quiet the noise of ambition and fear. He had to stop wanting the prize and start understanding the purpose. He thought of his past, of command decisions that had cost lives, of the ghost of a crewman he could not save. He let the memory surface, not with the sharp sting of regret, but with the quiet acceptance of its weight. As he did, a new corridor of soft, steady light unfolded before them, gentle and inviting. The maze was not a puzzle to be solved. It was a mirror, and the only way forward was to look into it without flinching. The twisting corridors of light simply ended, spilling the Starseeker into a silence so profound it felt like a physical substance. They hung in a cavernous space, but it held no machines, no stored treasures of metal or gemstone. Instead, the chamber cradled swirling nebulae of captured light, each one a self-contained galaxy of memories. As Kaelen watched, one of the nebulae coalesced into a perfect, moving image of a city beneath twin suns, its towers reaching for a violet sky, the lives of millions playing out in a silent, beautiful dance. Another swirled into the image of a deep-sea civilization, beings of gentle luminescence gliding through alien oceans. These were not mere recordings. They were the distilled essence of entire cultures, the complete knowledge, art, and lived experiences of the Star Kings and every world they had ever cherished. "This is the treasure," Kaelen breathed, the truth landing with the weight of a world. They did not hoard wealth, they preserved everyone. The vault was not a trophy room. It was a library of souls, a final, desperate sanctuary against the absolute silence of cosmic extinction. As this understanding settled upon them, a single, solitary data sphere, no larger than a human fist, detached itself from the nearest nebula. It drifted slowly, purposefully, across the void until it hung just beyond the Starseeker's viewport. In that moment, a new communication filled their minds, not with words but with a pure, crystalline concept. The choice was laid bare. They could take this one record, this single, priceless echo of a lost civilization, and depart with a discovery that would redefine history. Or they could reach for the legacy of the entire vault, to become the new guardians of all that remained. But the unspoken warning was clear. To grasp for everything was to accept a burden for which they might be utterly unprepared, a responsibility that had broken the gods who had created this place. The fate of countless souls now rested on a single, impossible decision. The choice was a fragile, suspended thing, shattered by the roar of tearing metal. The rusted talon, crippled but not dead, had clawed its way through the final luminous corridor, its hull sparking as it forced an entrance into the sacred chamber. Captain Vorlag stood in his shattered viewport, his face a mask of avarice and rage. He did not see the beauty of the swirling nebulae or the tragic weight of the preserved souls. He saw only power, a weapon to be seized. "All of it will be mine," he screamed, his voice a distorted shriek across the void. His ship's remaining cannons swiveled, but they did not aim for the Starseeker. Instead, they targeted the very heart of the chamber, the central core where the energies of a million memories coalesced. The volley of plasma fire was an act of profound sacrilege. It struck the core not with a destructive explosion, but with a violent, dissonant frequency. The chamber groaned, a sound felt more in the soul than heard by the ear. The beautiful, swirling nebulae of light flickered, their harmonious dance breaking into chaotic, jagged streaks. A containment failure, Jax yelled, his voice raw with panic. He is trying to force a data dump to rip the knowledge free. It is overloading. The very fabric of the vault began to destabilize. The walls of living light pulsed with a sickly, unstable rhythm. The gentle, preserved memories of entire worlds started to bleed together into a screaming cacophony of raw information, a storm of light and agony. Vorlag had not just attacked a place. He had wounded a universe of ghosts, and in his greed, he was unraveling the only sanctuary they had ever known. The vault screamed, not in sound but in pure, undiluted agony. The violent intrusion had triggered its most ancient and terrible protocol. This was the arrival of the destroyers, the very event the Star Kings had died to prevent. The serene labyrinth of light shattered. Corridors of living energy, once a graceful dance, now twisted into jagged, constricting snares. The walls themselves began to collapse inward, the beautiful nebulae of preserved memories flashing in rapid, panicked succession before winking out into absolute nothingness. Each fading light was the death of a world for the second and final time. A wave of annihilating force radiated from the chamber's heart, a silent shockwave of erasure that dissolved everything in its path. The Star Seeker was thrown violently, alarms shrieking as their hull was battered by the disintegrating reality around them. Jax clung to his console, his face illuminated by the frantic, dying lights. The self-destruct is systemic. It is not just destroying the structure, it is purging the data. Every memory, every soul stored here, it is being formatted from existence. To save even a single one of those fading lights, they would have to outrun the end of a universe, a wave of nothingness that was consuming the very space they occupied. The race was no longer for a prize, but against oblivion itself. The data sphere pulsed against Kaelen's palm, a warm, living rhythm in the chaos. Lumina's final, chiming message echoed in his mind, a riddle that was now a command. One may be saved, a seed to regrow, or none. The choice defines the king. He looked from the sphere to the viewport, where the beautiful lights of 1,000,000 souls were being systematically erased. To take it for himself was to save one world, to hoard a single story like a jewel in the dark. But a king does not hoard. A king protects his people. And in this final, collapsing moment, all of those fading lights were his people. His decision was instant, born of a clarity that only imminent oblivion can bring. He tossed the sphere to Jax, routed to the main transmitter, broadcast it, all of it, on the widest possible band. Jax's eyes widened, understanding dawning. He was not saving the seed for planting, he was throwing it to the wind. With frantic, precise movements, he jacked the sphere into the ship's communication array, overriding every safety protocol. The Star Seeker's powerful transmitter flared to life, aiming not at a single point, but casting its signal out in all directions, an open-handed offering to the entire galaxy. The data contained within that single sphere, the complete story of a civilization that had valued art and peace above all else, began to stream out into the void. It was a story of their architecture, their music, the quiet philosophy of their daily lives, all encoded in a burst of pure information. It was a final act of preservation, a desperate shout into the night, ensuring that even as the vault died, one of its children would not be forgotten. The signal would travel for centuries, a ghost in the ether, waiting for someone, somewhere to listen. The Star Seeker shuddered as a wave of pure nothingness washed over its hull. Behind them, the rusted talon was gone, its atoms unmade by the vault's final, furious rejection. There were no explosions, only a silent, terrifying unwriting of reality. The pathways of light were now collapsing tunnels, their walls bleeding into static before dissolving into a gray, featureless void. Navigating was instinct, a desperate dance through a dying god's last synaptic firings. Kaelen threw the ship into a spiraling dive, avoiding a corridor that folded in on itself like a closing fist. "We are not going to make it out the way we came," Jax shouted, his voice strained. "The primary entrance is gone. It's sealed behind the Talon. Their only path was forward, deeper into the disintegrating maze, hoping to find a rupture, a flaw in the vault's own death throes through which they could force an exit." It was a race against a closing map, every route they had taken now simply ceasing to exist in their wake. The ship bucked violently as a surge of raw data, the screaming final memories of 1,000 cultures, washed over their shields like an electromagnetic tide. They were flying through a universe experiencing its own death, and the echo was enough to shatter any mind that listened too closely. All they could do was run, pushing the engines to their screaming limit, chasing the faintest glimmer of stability in a reality that was deleting itself around them. The choice to save the data was made. Now they had to live long enough for it to matter. The Star Seeker tumbled from the fading spatial tier, its hull groaning as reality reasserted itself. Behind them, where the impossible geometry of the vault had hung in the fury of the binary stars, there was now only empty space. It did not explode. It simply ceased, a final, silent act of self-erasure that left no debris, no energy signature, nothing at all to mark its passing except for the hollow ache in their hearts. They had watched a universe die, but as Kaelen and Jax drifted in their crippled ship, wrestling with the weight of that cosmic loss, something else was happening. The Star Seeker's final act, its desperate, open-handed broadcast, was still traveling. That single data sphere, a compressed symphony of a civilization's soul, did not die with the vault. It radiated outward at the speed of light, a ghost signal sliding through the silent gaps between stars. On a remote agricultural moon, a young student monitoring old equipment for her astrophysics class watched her console flicker. A cascade of unfamiliar symbols and haunting, melodic frequencies resolved into a perfect, three-dimensional schematic for a building that defied gravity. In the heart of a bustling trade hub, a historian specializing in pre-Republic artifacts jolted upright as his terminal chimed, displaying a complete linguistic key to a language scholars had declared forever untranslatable. On a generation ship coasting through the void, a composer heard a new piece of music in a dream, a harmony of such profound peace that it brought tears to his eyes, only to find the same melody, note for note, appearing as an anomalous data packet in the ship's public archives. Each recipient, in their own isolated corner of the galaxy, received a different fragment of the whole, a piece of art, a philosophical treatise, a mathematical constant that simplified fusion theory. They did not know where it came from. There was no signature, no claim of ownership, just a perfect, anonymous gift of knowledge and beauty. The legacy of the Star Kings was no longer locked away. It was a seed scattered to the wind, taking root in a million different minds, its origin a beautiful mystery that would echo through the ages. The ship was a ghost in the void, its familiar predatory silhouette hanging just beyond their damaged viewport. Every instinct screamed for Kaelen to raise their pitifully weak shields to try and run, but the Obsidian-class interceptor's weapons remained dark, a silent testament to a profound shift. Then the comm channel chimed, a soft, clean tone they had never heard from it before. The voice that followed was not the distorted, mechanical snarl of their hunter. It was clear, calm, and carried a weight of ages. "You passed the final test," it said, the words resonating with a strange, quiet reverence. "You gave instead of taking." The Wardens thank you. Before either of them could form a single word in response, the interceptor pivoted with impossible grace and vanished into the warp, leaving only the silent, star-dusted blackness. The sudden peace felt louder than any battle. Jax was the first to break the silence, his voice a hushed whisper. "The Wardens, all this time we were not being hunted. We were being tested. Every close call, every near miss, the way it herded us toward the Cygnus Veil instead of simply obliterating us in open space. It was all part of the trial. The true treasure of the Star Kings was never meant for a single hand to grasp. It was a legacy that demanded selflessness, a final proof that someone in the universe was still capable of giving a beautiful secret away for nothing in return. Their final act of broadcasting the data had been the one thing the silent observers were waiting to see. So the vault was not just a library, Kaelen murmured, the pieces clicking into a terrifying, beautiful whole. It was a filter, and the wardens are the ones who clean the filter. They are the reason the legend of the Star Kings is only a whisper, because anyone who ever sought the vault for power was simply erased from the story. They had not just found a secret, they had been judged by its guardians and found worthy. The question that remained was far greater than any they had asked before. If they were the first to pass the test in millennia, what did the wardens now expect them to do with that fragile, scattered legacy now blooming silently across the galaxy? A hero's welcome is a fragile thing in a galaxy hungry for power. Kaelen and his crew returned not to universal praise but to a fractured legacy. On some worlds, they were celebrated as the discoverers of the Star King's gift, the source of the strange and beautiful data fragments now seeding a quiet renaissance in art and science. But in the shadowy ports and lawless asteroid belts, a very different story was being told. The truth of their selfless act was drowned out by a more compelling, more avaricious lie. They were not the saviors of a legacy. They were the thieves who had stolen the ultimate treasure for themselves. The lie found its most violent voice in the remnants of Captain Vorlag's faction. They had lost their leader and their ship to the vault's final judgment, and they needed a target for their rage and their greed. They spun a tale of betrayal, of Kaelen triggering the vault's destruction to cover his escape with its core power source. A bounty was placed on the crew of the Starseeker, a price so astronomical it turned every shadow into a potential enemy. Their homecoming became a gauntlet. Docking requests were mysteriously cancelled. Old allies grew nervous, their communications terse and distant. A plasma bolt fired from a hidden perch on a space station hull was their first official welcome back to so-called civilization. This new battlefield was far more insidious than the gravitational storms of Casilos. There were no clear enemies, only a constant gnawing pressure. Trust became a currency they could no longer afford. Every new face at a starport bar, every hailing frequency from an unknown vessel carried the potential for violence. They were living a paradox, revered and reviled for the same act. Their greatest moment of selflessness twisted into a narrative of ultimate selfishness. How do you prove you gave away a treasure when everyone believes you are hiding it? The legacy they had scattered to the stars was now a ghost that haunted their every move, a bounty on their heads that ensured they could never truly stop running. The bounty on their heads had turned every starport into a potential trap, yet Kaelen found a strange sense of peace in the quiet of his quarters. The Starseeker's logs glowed before him, a mosaic of intercepted transmissions from across the spiral arm. A research colony on Lyra Prime was using the architectural data to build self-sustaining arcologies. A composer in the Cygnus system had woven the haunting melodies into a symphony that was healing deep-seated societal divisions. Each signal was a tiny point of light, a spark of hope kindled from their single act of surrender. "We did not find a treasure," he said to Jax, who had just entered. "We became its distributors." The weight of the statement settled between them. The vault was gone, but its purpose was not. It had been a filter, and they were the only ones who had passed through. The silent wardens had judged them and departed, leaving a void in the galaxy's silent custodianship. "Someone has to do it," Jax replied, his usual cynicism replaced by a grim resolve. "The knowledge is out there now, scattered and vulnerable. It needs a shepherd, not an owner." Their notoriety was a weapon, and their ship was a key. They would not run from the legend of the Starseeker. They would embrace it. They would use the very bounty on their heads as a beacon, letting the whispers of their discovery draw other fragments of lost lore to the surface. Their new mission was clear. They would hunt for the galaxy's forgotten truths, not to lock them away in another vault, but to read them aloud for anyone who would listen. They were no longer just explorers, they were becoming the new, unofficial wardens, a silent guard for the echoes of beauty the universe kept trying to forget. A faint, encrypted whisper threaded its way through the Starseeker's comms array. Jax isolated it from the background chatter of the galaxy, a signal piggybacking on the very legacy broadcast they had sent out months ago. It was a distress call, brittle with static, from a xenoarchaeological outpost on a forgotten moon in the Zeta Reticuli system. Their message spoke of a discovery, another echo of the Star Kings they called it, something that sang with the same resonance as the Vault's data. Then a scream of raw interference shredded the transmission, and the channel went dead. The silence that followed was louder than any alarm. Jax replayed the final millisecond of the signal, his face grim. "That energy signature," he said, his voice low, "it is the same distortion that scarred our hull when the Hunter first found us. The destroyers are not a legend. They are still out there, and they are hunting again." This was no longer a mission of quiet curation. The first thread of their new purpose had been cast, and it led directly into the path of the very force the Star Kings had died to stop. Someone else had found a fragment of the legacy, and the galaxy's silent janitors were moving in to clean. The silence on Typhon's surface was a physical weight. Their boots crunched on the grey regolith as they approached the domed research station, its airlock door hanging open like a slack jaw. Inside, the air was still and cold, the hum of life support the only sound. They found the scientists in the common area, seated around a table as if for a meal. Their eyes were open, unblinking, their faces serene and utterly vacant. It was a waking death, their minds scoured clean of every memory and thought. Jax scanned one of the still forms, his device emitting a soft, troubled chime. "No physical trauma," he reported, his voice hushed in the eerie stillness. "It is like their consciousness was just deleted." They searched the silent base, the feeling of violation growing with each empty room. Then, in the main lab, Kaelen found it, carved over and over into the metal housing of the primary console, as if done with a frantic, desperate fingernail, was a single phrase. The vault was a lock, the key is still turning. The words were a riddle, a final, terrified message from a mind on the brink of erasure. What kind of key turns after the lock is gone? The vault was dust, its treasures scattered. But this suggested the vault was merely one component in a far grander and still active mechanism. The destroyers had not come for data. They had come to stop a process they could not control, a countdown that was still ticking down somewhere in the dark. The phrase carved into the console was a ghost in the machine, a warning that followed them into the station's lower access corridor. The air grew colder, the only light coming from their suit lamps as they descended into the planetary crust. The silence was different here, not the hollow quiet of death, but the humming stillness of a thing waiting. At the end of a service tunnel, shielded by crude rock, they found it. It was a small, crystalline orb, no larger than a human heart, resting on a natural stone pedestal. Its surface was the same opalescent material as the derelict they had explored months before, and it pulsed with a soft, internal light. It was a smaller, dormant cousin to the artifact that had first guided them to the Cygnus Veil. As Kaelen stepped closer, the orb responded to his presence. It did not react to Jax, only to him, as if recognizing the unique energy signature of the one who had faced the vault and made the choice. The orb brightened, its light condensing into a beam that projected a complex, shimmering image into the dark air before them. It was a star map, but it dwarfed the first fragment they had recovered. This was not a single path to one hidden treasure. This was a web, a sprawling network of golden points of light scattered along the entire galactic rim. Each point was labeled with a string of Star King symbols, and at the center of the web, one point shone with a fierce, urgent brilliance. Jax translated the symbols slowly, his voice filled with awe. "These are not just vaults," he said, "they are archives. Each one holds a different aspect of their civilization. one for biology, one for engineering, one for art. But the central one, the bright one, its designation is different. It translates to the core. The core is not a library. The map labeled it as the control nexus, the central processor for the entire network. The vault we found was just one node, one lock in a system of unimaginable scale. The key is still turning. The message carved upstairs was a literal truth. The activation of the first vault, their choice to broadcast its data, it had sent a signal through this ancient web. It had begun a startup sequence for a machine that spanned the galaxy, and the core was now booting up. We did not just open a door, Kaelen realized, a cold dread settling in his stomach. We flipped the main power switch for a dead empire, and every predator in the dark just felt the lights turn on. The crystalline orb's light did not fade. It pulsed in time with Kaelen's own heartbeat, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. Then a synthesized voice, smooth as polished stone, spoke directly into his mind. The cycle begins anew, Warden. The destroyers seek the master key. You must secure the network. The words were not a request. They were a declaration, an activation of a title he had not chosen. Jax stared from the glowing map to Kaelen's face, his usual sarcasm replaced by a stark, sober understanding. He gestured at the web of lights, a galactic-scale responsibility now hanging in the air between them. It looks like our vacation is over. They moved with a new, grim purpose, leaving the silent outpost and its mind-wiped inhabitants behind. Back aboard the Starseeker, the ship felt different. Their recent repairs and upgrades, once just improvements, now felt like a premonition. The hull plating was stronger, the sensor suite more sensitive, the engines tuned for longer, harder runs. It was as if the ship itself had been prepared for this moment without their knowing. Kaelen input the coordinates for the nearest marker on the ancient map, a point of light in a nearby sector labeled only as the Archive of Biology. The nav computer accepted the course with an unusual silence, as if it had been waiting. As the engines powered up, the hum was deeper, more certain. They were not just chasing a legend anymore. They were answering a call that had been waiting 1,000,000 years for someone to finally pick up. The Starseeker turned, a silver needle aimed at the heart of a sleeping network, its crew now the reluctant wardens of a legacy that was only just beginning to wake. The star lines bled into rivers of impossible light, a hypnotic cascade that mirrored the torrent of responsibility crashing over Kaelen. He stood on the bridge, his reflection a ghost against the swirling vortex of hyperspace. This was no scavenger hunt. The title of Warden was not an honor, it was a chain binding him to a war that had ended before humanity learned to walk upright. He was not just protecting a secret anymore. He was the sole, fragile barrier between a sleeping network of cosmic knowledge and the silent, patient entity that had already begun to erase it. The fate of unborn civilizations, of entire futures that could be shaped by the Star King's gifts, now rested in the hands of one man and his battered ship. Every light on that ancient map represented a choice, a gamble that could either uplift the galaxy or draw the destroyers down upon it like wolves to a beacon. How do you protect a legacy when your every move to defend it only makes it more visible? The Archive of Biology was their first stop, a single thread in a web of unimaginable complexity, and pulling on it could unravel everything. The weight of the Warden's title settled not as a crown but as a harness. Kaelen Vance was no longer just a man who had survived an ancient trap. He had become its new trigger mechanism, a living component in a machine whose true purpose was only just beginning to reveal itself. The legacy of the Star Kings was never a single treasure to be claimed. It was a perpetual duty, a relay race across time where the baton was a secret too vast for any one civilization to hold. Their desperate act, that open-handed broadcast of a single civilization's memory, had not been a final act. It was an ignition sequence. That scattered data became a quiet beacon of unity in a galaxy fractured by petty ambitions. On isolated worlds and bustling stations, the shared fragments of that beautiful, alien knowledge began to weave invisible threads of common understanding. Architects inspired by the same gravity-defying blueprints, musicians harmonizing with melodies from a dead star, scientists collaborating on principles gifted by ghosts, these were the unspoken allies in a war they did not yet know was being fought. They were the living proof that the Star King's greatest secret was not a weapon or a power source, but the transformative power of sacrifice. The real treasure was the choice to give it all away. Yet that same act of selflessness had illuminated a battlefield of cosmic scale. The network of vaults was now awakening, and with every pulse of light from a newly activated archive, the enigmatic destroyers drew closer. This was the true conflict, a silent war for the soul of history itself, where one side sought to preserve every note in the symphony of existence and the other sought to impose an eternal, silent peace. The artifact's final log entry offers no comfort, only a purpose that echoes into the infinite dark. If you are the answer, it asks, what was the question?